What's up, guys? It's the Bluebloods coming back at you with another ACC in 28 days episode. We start with the Virginia Cavaliers today, and we are joined by Dave Koehn, who is the director of broadcasting at the University of Virginia and the voice of the Virginia Cavaliers. And I just want to say I appreciate you joining me today, Dave.
Oh, happy to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
For sure, for sure. And I mean, I feel like we have to start out with this past season, which saw Virginia end up with a 500 record. They wound up at 5-5, but there were some really impressive wins there. A huge win over North Carolina, middle of the season. They finished off very, very strong. Did this season meet, exceed, or fall short of your preseason expectations?
Yeah, I think for Virginia, the expectations, you're coming off of what was an Orange Bowl season the year before. And, obviously you have high expectations just based on that. But the truth of the matter is, I think for a lot of folks, they went into that season maybe on the outside looking at this Virginia team and thinking there would be a significant drop off just by virtue of the fact that you didn't have Bryce Perkins back, who was the quarterback who carried the load really in that season before in that Orange Bowl bid. And clearly Perkins was a unique talent and is a guy that'll go down in Virginia history as one of the better quarterbacks that ever played here. But I think that we knew anyone who was close to the team had a sense that this team could be pretty good still because of the fact that they had another young quarterback by the name of Brennan Armstrong, who we'd seen briefly, and we thought that he was going to be a pretty good player for this team. So, all that to say, the challenge for Virginia was they also knew that the schedule was going to be significant. It was going to be a real stiff test, and it ended up proving to be just that for this team. They had to fight and claw their way through a really slow start to the season, thanks in large measure to some really tough games along the way. But I think all things said, I would say things ended up about where maybe I might have expected. Maybe not exactly the timing and the teams that they beat, but it was a good team, but it was, again, a very difficult schedule to go up against.
Right. And I mean, you mentioned, replacing Bryce Perkins. You had Brennan Armstrong come in. There was a bit of a quarterback battle there. A lot of people thought Keontae Thompson out of Mississippi State was going to come in and take that starting job after Bryce Perkins. Armstrong ended up starting most of the season. So for you, did he live up to those expectations? And what separated him from Thompson and the other quarterbacks that could have, been the starter for Virginia this year?
Yeah, Keaton Thompson was someone we thought was going to be battling for that starting job as well. But as it turned out, the transfer, coming out of Mississippi State, he had a significant shoulder injury. And that really precluded him from being able to play the position regularly. And it was something that, I think I have nothing but respect for Keaton Thompson because he was such a good soldier through that whole process for UVA, and that he was willing to do whatever he needed to help the team out. And I think he found a pretty good niche for himself, as it turned out, as he was able to be a guy who was able to play a number of different positions. You could slot him at receiver. You could slot him as a wildcat quarterback, and, even at times almost like a tight end type of player or an H-back. So he was all over the place, and I thought he brought a different dimension that kept defenses on their heels quite a bit, working in conjunction with Brennan Armstrong. So really, that from that perspective, he was not able to really truly be in the quarterback battle because of that injury. Now, that said, Ira Armstead is a true freshman who also has tremendous skill and speed, but he's a young guy, and he was green, and he certainly wasn't ready to take over the job in his first season. And I think, with Brennan Armstrong being as effective as he was, that's going to be Brennan's job to lose moving forward. Now, all that said, Armstead, the freshman quarterback, was still contributing in a similar manner to what Keaton Thompson was, as sort of an X-factor type of quarterback. So ultimately, though, he was injured about 4 or 5 games into the season and lost for the year. So they weren't able to use him. But even with the injury, that was the good thing about Keaton Thompson's situation, was he was able to still get out there. So really, the big challenge was knowing in a season like this, you're almost always going to have to use your backup quarterback at some point. Virginia didn't have a whole lot in the way of depth. And at times, there was a couple games where they did have to turn to Lyndall Stone, who, for all of his effectiveness as a good mind and a guy who knows the offense, he wants to be a coach, he doesn't have a very strong arm. But he still managed to help to some degree when he did get out there. But he certainly wasn't Brennan Armstrong, and defenses certainly changed when Brennan wasn't there.
Right. And I want to shift to the coaching staff here. I mean, Bronco Mendenhall, he came from BYU. He was 2-10 in his first season, but he's really rebuilt this program, won the ACC Coastal last year, made a New Year's Six Bowl, like you said. What makes Mendenhall such a special coach, and how has he achieved such a successful rebuild here?
I've been able to be a part of a couple of rebuilds since I've been here, and a couple of very successful ones. Now, Bronco Mendenhall would love to have the same kind of success Tony Bennett has in men's basketball, but there are definitely some parallels to the way they've gone about things from the very beginning. And I think each school, this is the beauty of college sports. Every school is unique into itself. And you've got to have in your institution, if you want to be successful, you've got to find the person that fits your program and your personality as a university. And I think with both of those guys I just mentioned, Virginia did a really good job of that. And a lot of that is really knowing who you are and having an identity and really building toward that identity. It's not always going to work. But I can promise you, more often than not, it won't work if you don't have something that you're working towards, some form of an identity. And I think for Bronco Mendenhall, that's been really embracing this idea. Look, Virginia's an academic university. It's not very, in some ways, it's very similar to what he was dealing with at BYU when he was the head coach of the Cougars, where he knew he was recruiting a different type of student athlete than some of the other schools. Bronco Mendenhall would not work at Alabama. I don't think Nick Saban would work at Virginia. It just has to be that right fit. So I think a lot of this thing is built on, buy-in and recruiting the type of kids that are going to buy in to maybe a little bit of a less glamorous approach. It's a little bit more blue collar for both Bronco Mendenhall and Tony Bennett. Let's call it what it is, the way those guys operate their programs. And for Bronco from day one, it was about building the culture for this team. And it wasn't just lip service. You hear it said a lot, but I can assure you from day one, Bronco Mendenhall, that was his first order of business. That was the foundation that this thing was all built on. It was, before we're even going to practice, we're going to work on things like how to even run out of the tunnel. I mean, it was that kind of stuff in just, and I tell you, these guys did more conditioning drills those first couple of years than you would ever imagine. It was, they had to do it exactly right the way they entered onto the field from the sidelines, and just very basic things like that. So when you do that, you sacrifice a little bit of early return, and we saw that. Virginia goes 1-11 his first season at UVA, and it was a lot of people saying, "What are we gotten ourselves into?" But it had started to bear fruit slowly but surely, and sure enough, every year they got better in the win department until ultimately they got to that Orange Bowl. And so, yeah, I think he's built a culture. And with that said, he's also got some good assistants around him, and I think he's got guys he trusts and guys that he brought with him from BYU. And now we're starting to see some guys that are coming in from UVA that have played for him. And that's a big part of it. He really wants to know who his staff is and really trust them and make sure that those guys work well together. And that's part of the, part and parcel for one of the reasons I think that they've been able to elevate. But it comes back to identity and it comes back to buy-in. And these guys buy into what Bronco's selling.
Right. And I like how you mentioned, the type of player, the type of culture, because this national signing day just wrapped up and Virginia signed a top 35 class according to 247 Sports, one of the best in the country. And we saw top 100 talent, so someone like Bryce Carter, be kept in state by Virginia, which was a huge get. They also got significant transfers like Anthony Johnson from Louisville. In your opinion, is this culture, looking for that perfect type of player to fit that culture, one of the reasons that Mendenhall's been able to turn around recruiting like this? And who in this recruiting class are you most excited to see now that they're signed on campus?
Man, I'll tell you, I think for Virginia, so much of getting those guys, the maybe guys that more other high tier teams are after it to Charlottesville. I think a lot of it has to do truly with winning at that point. I mean, early on, you got to uncover the diamonds in the rough. You got to find the Charles Snowdens, the guys that did not have a lot of people after him. Charles Snowden, I think, there are a lot of people that say he should be playing basketball, but they found a guy that fit their system, this 3-4 with a long, defensive linebacker and a guy like that you can bring in. And so you got to find the right fits for who you are. And once you do that, I think you start winning some games. Virginia beat Virginia Tech. I think that was instrumental in terms of trying to turn the image of the program around. That had to happen. I mean, that just had to
Right.
happen, and it was unfortunate that they weren't able to get him. Last year is Virginia Tech ultimately beat up on really a banged up Virginia team at the end of the season, but truly they had to at least get one of those. And so for them to get that, I think it really kind of changed the narrative around Virginia football, and it made it a more appealing place to go. But but early on, again, you got to get the guys that can get you to that breakthrough point where you're winning enough to bring them in. And, as far as who I would be looking forward to seeing, I will be completely honest with you. I don't follow the recruiting that closely. I really don't. I want to see guys when they get to fall camp.
Right.
And, I'll have an idea who some of these guys are when they get there. But so oftentimes you get fooled by recruiting rankings. I mean, you'll see these guys come in, and I think that's dangerous. I think when you get too much into putting weight into who a guy was, what the analysts think, and there's so much politics that go into rating these guys. And sometimes that's why I also look at national rankings. Do you like to say it? Yeah, it is. It's a good image thing when you can get into that top 25 in the national rankings as far as recruiting. But I want to be in the top 25 in the overall rankings, and that doesn't happen until guys actually start putting it on display on the field. So, from that perspective, I'll say this. I think one of the biggest challenges Virginia faced this year was truly attrition on defense. By the end of the season, this team had a lot of attrition, whether it was guys that opted out at the beginning of the season. And I think also for the Cavaliers, in the middle of the season to lose Juwan Briggs at nose tackle. That was a foundational piece that they were building around. So, he was a kid who came in very highly lauded as well. And he seemed like a really good fit. So that was a bit of a surprise when he left. And I do think that left a void that they're trying to fill. So I'm more excited about guys that are coming back next year. Aaron Falmouy, that's a guy that didn't play this year. He was out because of he lives in Hawaii, opted out for last season for a number of reasons, family being one. And then Mike Hollins, another guy, a running back who didn't play for Virginia. Cavaliers didn't have a ton of depth at running back, but Hollins is a potentially dynamic runner, and he'll be back as well next year. So I'm kind of more excited to see those guys, and then we'll see what happens with the first-year guys and some of the transfers.
Right, I like that. I know it's all complicated now too because everyone got an extra year, so a lot of teams with scholarship numbers are all over the place. It's going to be a different season for the next few years. But looking ahead to 2021 to kind of end this off, a huge non-conference game. I feel like it's glaring on the schedule. Provo, Utah, the return of Mendenhall to BYU. You can't overlook that game. October 30th is when it's scheduled. How significant is this game? And how important is it to play in front of some of these West Coast recruits that Mendenhall might already have a tie since he's recruited out West before? How important are all these factors in playing BYU this year?
Well, I'll tell you one guy who does not want to play BYU this year, Bronco Mendenhall. He has said it very vocally. He did not want to play this game. But this was part of the deal when he came to Virginia. That was part of the deal that was, is that exchange happened. So this thing is contractually determined. It's predetermined already, so it's going to happen. And for guys like me, it's great. We got storylines coming out of our ears going into that game, the return to Provo, Utah. But I think Bronco would just assume not be a part of that storyline, and he doesn't like the fact that he's going against the guys that those relationships he had there, and he said it. He would like to have that thing off the table. And then the other thing to your question about recruiting out west. While they do have their hands in on a number of guys out that direction, I think that helps. But I think the hope is to get a little bit more localized in their recruiting than maybe they've been. Virginia has been very national in its reach regarding players. But I think to your point earlier, you're starting to see that narrative change in Virginia. Keeping more guys around, I think, is a goal of this programs. And, they've done more work on the East Coast slowly but surely as they've been at UVA. And I think it just makes more sense. Now, that's not to say if you've got connections out west, which they do, that you turn them down if you've got some good opportunities. I mentioned Aaron Falmouy. He's from Hawaii. Couldn't be farther away from Virginia, but he's a good player. And, you've got some of those connections out there. So, yeah, if you can uncover a couple guys that maybe you wouldn't have, I think that's definitely a benefit to playing this game. But truly, for those of us that tell stories for a living and talk about this, it's a great game. Maybe for the coaching staff, not so much, at least at UVA.
Right. It's hard to keep the players rooting because I know they're going to want to win for Mendenhall. They don't want to go out there and lose to his former team. But looking at the 2021 season holistically, looking at the schedule, some of the players you mentioned coming back that could break out, What is the ceiling and or floor for this 2021 team?
Well, that's a good question. I I think they're vastly different. I really do, because as hard as the schedule was last year, you just mentioned a non-conference game at BYU. Well, guess what? Virginia's also got Notre Dame on its non-conference schedule this coming year. They've got Illinois on the non-conference schedule. So none of these are walkthroughs. And then you've got William and Mary. And then, oh, by the way, in the Atlantic Coast Conference, you're going to have another strong season. I know the bowl games didn't go the way that the ACC would have liked this year, but it was such a strange bowl year. I mean, it really,
Right.
truly was. Heck, Virginia didn't even play in a bowl. Now, all that to say, I think that you're going to have a lot of talent back, a lot of quarterbacks back. I mean, you go to North Carolina this year. You go to Miami, a place that Virginia has really had a lot of trouble. You go to Louisville. That's a difficult place to play. And so you put it all together, this thing is so widely variable. All that is the backdrop. I think Virginia's got a good team. I think the defense is going to be significantly better. I think the offense is going to be better. You get most of your guys back from a year ago. So this is a team that I think can really do some damage, but you could also be a very good football team, and it may not even reflect itself just on the basis of how hard that schedule is going to be. So it's going to be
Right.
fascinating to watch.
Right. And I love asking people these last two questions, last 2/3 is kind of a double parted, are about Charlottesville, Scott Stadium, your career. I want to shift to the environment of Charlottesville, the campus. What makes Scott Stadium, this city, such a unique environment on game day?
Yeah, they're trying to get game day back to where it was back in the day, truly. And obviously, last year
Right.
nobody was there. It was an eerie feeling on game day, candidly. But no, and I can't wait to see fans. I cannot tell you how much I am pining to see fans in the seats again. If we can hopefully get back to some sense of normalcy coming up next year, but on a typical game day, I think UVA, in really any day, I think it's just an amazing campus, or as they're quick to point out, in Charlottesville grounds at UVA, Thomas Jefferson's grounds. But it's just steeped in history. It's got the tradition, and on a fall day, it is just there's nowhere better to be, in my opinion. If you got a big game and people are bought in, man, it is awesome. But the challenge has been getting fans there to the degree they were. And I know Virginia's not alone in that matter. I mean, you look at some of the traditional powers in Michigan, it's hard to get fans out to games again. It'll be really interesting to see after the pandemic is through what that looks like. If people are quick to embrace getting back to live sports and being at games again, I could see it going any number of directions. So it'll be fascinating to see that. But whether it's Cabman running out on the field before, I mean, you got a live animal going out onto the field before every game, which is kind of fun too. And here's a guy wielding a saber as he rides out there, and the smoke and everything that comes with it. It's a great place. And it's one of my favorite places to call a game, I think, from our perspective, where we sit in the stadium. And this is getting into the weeds and kind of inside baseball here, but it's just a great vantage point from where our broadcast booth is. There's a lot of space. We're low, and you're right in the middle of it. So yeah, it's fun, but I'll tell you, it's a heck of a lot more fun when you got fans and butts in the seats, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree, because I could see, every stadium being packed, because I know myself, this is the first year I haven't been to a college football game in years. So I think it go, like you said, either one extreme to the other. But last two-part question here. What has been since you've been the voice of the Cavaliers, you were hired in 2008, I believe, and so you've seen some exciting, memorable games. It doesn't have to be football. We're a college football podcast, but I like all sports. What has been your favorite or most memorable call in the booth since you've been at Virginia?
In any sport, you said?
Any sport.
Well, undoubtedly the national championship for men's
I
basketball.
thought
I mean,
so.
those 3 games in a row were 3 games you dream about as a broadcaster, and the chance to call them back to back to back. I mean, an
Right.
overtime game tying shot in Louisville, Kentucky to go to your first Final Four since 1984. And then you follow that up with a win with 3 free throws to win it in the last second against Auburn to go to the national championship, and then an overtime winner in the national championship. I mean, are you kidding me? That was just the stuff of dreams. I mean, I still pinch myself that I got to experience it. But I'll tell you this, in football, it was a heck of a year we finished out with before the pandemic set in, because you had that, and then promptly 6 months later, My favorite moment is, I think Virginia broadcaster on the football side of things came that following November when it was Virginia finally snapping the streak against Virginia Tech. I had called 12 straight losses in that series before I finally got to call a win. I mean, it was just the ball and chain that was the monkey on the back. It was a gorilla on your back, and it wouldn't go away until you finally exercised the demons. And they had a great game that they did it on. It was in front of the home fans, which made it even sweeter. That was an amazing moment as well. But yeah, 2019 was a year that not many Virginia fans are going to forget anytime soon.
And man, I'm sure you can see in the background my hoodie. I'm an Auburn graduate. I was at the Final Four game, and I was on the other side of the stadium, so we didn't hear the foul call because, as you know, the stadium erupted. So we're celebrating, and then when we turn around, I think Kyle Guy was at the free throw line, and we were like, "What is going on here?" So you guys broke my heart. Y'all, that's probably the worst sports moment of my entire life. And I was going to ask,
bad memory.
I was going to ask you if you double dribbled, but I feel like I know the answer here. But no, it's all good, man. That game, even though it's one of my worst losses as a fan, that experience, like you said, for Auburn and Virginia, both teams, Auburn's first Final Four, you said Virginia hasn't been since the 50s. I mean, that whole Final Four is an amazing experience. But I appreciate you coming on, man. Had to talk a little bit of basketball. I'm a huge basketball fan too, but I'm gonna give you a chance to plug. I know you call the Virginia games, social media handles, all that. I'll let you plug it to our listeners, man, because they need to be able to find you.
Sure. If they want to check me out on social media, I have to confess I am not a social media hound, but I do the Twitter game some. So that's at Wahoo Voice on Twitter. If anyone wants to check it out, keep you up on all the Virginia stuff. But if you're an Auburn fan, I don't know, steer clear. Huh?
It's all good, man. I remember watching the Virginia game too, and the storm in the field and everything. It was a great moment just as a college football fan in general. But we definitely appreciate you, man. I know you got some stuff to do and everything, so we'll go ahead and end it here, guys. But y'all know where to find the Bluebloods, man, and we'll be back next week with another ACC in 28 days. But for right now, guys, we are out.